Hi, good afternoon. This is going to be a reading of the first chapter in my book Strange Fire in a Vacuum, Understanding the Social Epidemic of Mass Shootings in America. I was just watching the Functional Melancholics channel again, and he was doing a video on absurdism and talking about Camus and the writer Camus and how people around Camus, they wanted the universe to behave like a good story. That's what he said. I thought that was very well put. Um, in some ways, I wrote the book on mass shooters because I had been a newspaper reporter. I had been a crime and courts reporter for only 1 year. Um, I did work as a reporter again, but in a more general assignment capacity for another paper in the Virgin Islands, the Virgin Islands Daily News. But the main thrust of my brief stint as a journalist was crime. So what I saw happening was people wanted the mass shooter phenomenon to behave like a familiar story. And the familiar story, increasingly that they had been fed and that they demanded from the media, was all of these people are mentally ill and the mental health care system is failing the rest of us by not containing the phenomenon, by not stopping this from happening. And it almost became a form of entitlement that I started to notice among my fellow Americans, is this story that they wanted to tell themselves and wanted coverage of mass shooters to reflect. So right off the bat, I knew we had problems because I remember how chaotic and under pressure I was as a journalist and how I wouldn't really have the resources or the time to dig deeper. And the first chapter is very short, thank God, because I've been very ill this week and I don't have a lot of energy. But it gets at one main point that if you don't go any further, we don't buy the book. This is something that's very critical to understand about mass shooters and the mass shooting phenomenon. Now, when I started making notes for the book, I honestly did not see this point come up enough in coverage ever. And only later in the book, I referenced Gillian Peterson and Laurie Post and other Benjamin Radford, other criminologists who were sourced eventually, and they made this point right off the bat to people. So here we go. Chapter 1. Mass shooters' primary motive is suicide, not homicide. Victims are collateral. Mass shooters are primarily suicidal, not homicidal. They are men with an urge to kill themselves, coupled with a rage against the machine mentality that, because their political discourse is so splintered, often exacerbated by mass media portrayal of hurtful and dangerous cultural stereotypes, allows these men to pick targets randomly and indiscriminately. Feminist movements typified by #MeToo and civil rights activism, such as Black Lives Matter, anger and trigger many men who are already disgruntled because of perceived threats to their economic and social status. I was painting earlier. Sorry, I have black stuff in my fingers. Couple this backlash with the hostility to the rapidly changing infrastructure of technology and the surveillance state, and you have the basic mindset of a domestic terrorist slash mass shooter. Their biggest fears are displacement, obsolescence, and the dehumanizing effects of systems they no longer quite understand. The Unabomber was a signal actor, a forerunner for today's mass shooter. He was not trying to kill himself, but he was channeling the same angst that has led to suicidal aggression in mass shooters. That angst has gone viral. It has become amorphous as opposed to calculated and articulate. Trolling and doxing are other symptomatic behaviors arising from these root causes. According to the Centers for Disease Control, suicide rates rose in nearly every state from 1999 to 2016 to become the 10th leading cause of death among Americans. I don't know what it is now. I doubt it has been knocked off the top 10. It may even be further down. More than half of the people who died by suicide during this period were not known to have a, quote, mental health condition, unquote. How do we explain the leap to suicide in individuals with no reported history of mental illness? Suicide is not automatic evidence of a latent, undetected mental health condition in all or most cases, I would argue. When we automatically medicalize suicide, assuming some sort of organically induced state of brain disease beforehand, we dismiss any real causal factors rooted in social conditions. We pronounce it the result of pathology after the fact, and this limits inquiry into other non-medical explanations for a person's underlying dissatisfaction with and rejection of life in modern America. According to Lori Post, an epidemiologist and sociologist at Northwestern University who studies violence, mass shooters, quote, are almost always suicidal. Post's latest research shows that 80% of the perpetrators were suicidal before the shooting, which she says is key to understanding their actions, unquote. Quote, in every case, this was intended to be their final act, unquote, said Gillian Peterson, a psychologist and professor of criminal justice at Hamline University in Minnesota. Quote, they are murders, but they are murder-suicides, meaning the perpetrator doesn't intend to make it through the shooting. They are either killed by police, they shoot themselves, or they spend the rest of their lives behind bars, unquote. Imagine for a moment that you are suicidal, but not fully committed to the idea of killing yourself. What would give you the final resolve you need to take your own life? Creating severely limiting circumstances, a point of no return, in your present reality would certainly help resolve the inner conflict of wanting to die, but not having the gumption to go through with it. Killing other people traps the mass shooter in his own mess. By committing such a crime and having undeniable culpability, he forces his own hand against himself. Quote, other commonalities Peterson's research has found among mass shooters include childhood trauma, domestic violence, or a parent's suicide. A crisis point, such as being bullied or fired from a job, usually precedes a shooting rampage. Unquote. Okay, thank you.